course, we'll do some formal introduction here in just one moment. We did want to let you all know that this presentation, you probably just heard that over talking me here in a moment, this presentation will be recorded today. All of you that have joined us today, we will share back a link with the information of the presentation. So if you have any additional questions, et cetera, we'll be happy to assist you with those as we move forward. We will use the Q&A function today. So if you have a chat, please send a message in the chat. We'll be monitoring that information. If we can get you an answer in real time, we will. If it's something that we need to take offline and work with some of our internal partners to gather that information, we'll follow back up with you all on email, and we'll make sure that any question that is answered or those that are public in nature, we'll make sure that everyone has that information back as well. For the purpose of today's presentation, again, stop us at any time. This will be more of a conversation, an opportunity for us to share information with you all. And if you do have something that you want, please don't hesitate, put your hand up, put a question in the Q&A. Laura and I will be happy to assist you there. So again, as I mentioned before, you are in the right place. We will be discussing today employee engagement and required disclosures. So just to get started, just want to give you all some information about your presenters. So since I've been talking here, I guess I'll get us started. Again, Breon Rollins, consultant with the firm, have been with the firm now just shy of 4 years. While the firm is based in Portland, I'm based in Houston, Texas, so serve clients across the US. So I'm happy to be you all joining us today. Laura, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm the Director of Vendor Services here at Multnomah Group. I lead the firm's consulting services in the areas of plan management, and which includes vendor searches and assessments. I am new to Multnomah Group this year, and opposite direction of Breon, I'm up north of Portland and Seattle. Previously, I worked as a third-party evaluator for a wide variety of retirement plan search engagements. I've had an opportunity to work with a diverse group of plan sponsors, several different industries, and conducting searches across all market segments. So yeah, we look forward to the conversation today.
No, definitely. And here on our next slide, we definitely wanted to make sure we gave you all some information about Multnomah Group in general. We're a 100% fee-for-service consulting firm. We serve as fiduciaries with our clients. We really serve to be partners with our clients as well. So we have a slide here for you all to refer back to. We have consultants in Oregon, Washington, California, of course, Texas and Colorado. You'll see employee-owned, no outside shareholders. All of our decisions are made in a committee governance structure. We have 3 committees that really engage and outline how the decision-making is done during the firm. So we have our investment committee, our vendor services committee, as you have Laura here as our representative today, and then as well as our technical services committee. So again, we have a shared governance approach and integrated approach to support the clients that we work with. So again, we're eager to answer any of your questions, but we did want to share some information about the firm as well. All right, so the purpose for our presentation today, as a part of our information sharing, one of the things that we want to start out front is that the Department of Labor requires employers to educate their committee members on roles and responsibilities. And a part of this presentation will give you some information and some guidance around what the Department of Labor is looking for. The way that a committee is supposed to engage with its participants. So when you hear engagement, of course, we want an engaged workforce who is eager and excited about the exciting topic of retirement, of course, but at the same time, there are some things as an employer that we're required to do to make sure that we're engaging our participants in a legal and a structured manner. And then there's also the duty to monitor those service and providers that engage with employees as well. So of course, on one hand, you have what may happen as the plan fiduciary or the plan sponsor. You have some obligations or some requirements there. But of course, you have service providers, whether it be a record keeper or your audit practice or additional people who may contact your employees. You want to make sure that we're monitoring and engaging with those providers. You're monitoring what they're sending out to participants as well. So that's what the bulk of our presentation will be about today. But again, if you have any questions or any details as we're going along, please stop us, send a question in the chat, and we'll be able to get you some information there. So if I go just on the basis, ERISA requires that fiduciaries inform participants and beneficiaries. And I really want to pause there on the beneficiary piece, because oftentimes we cater and gear our information towards what's happening with our active participants that we can talk to, see, discuss things with on a daily basis. But this would also extend to participants through the plan through required disclosures. When you think about required disclosures, and we're going to go through a list as we get through the presentation today, but a quick example will be your summary plan description, or something upon request might be your plan document. Obviously, you're not going to be sending the long plan document out to every participant, but the plan description may be something that may be more actionable, that's required as a notice that you send out on a basis. Some of the information may not be available, so the committee may choose to make it available for purposes of transparency. If you have a committee that is, governed by the board, that has been delegated responsibility to manage the retirement process and be a part of the fiduciary responsibility for the committee, an example may be meeting minutes. You can share those minutes with your population to show, well, this is what we've been working on. This is how we've came to those decisions that hopefully support you in having a valuable and a great retirement as you go along. So Laura, I just want to throw a question to you here. In your role, I know you're often looking at a lot of these documents. What are some of the things that you're looking for, or areas that you may be looking at while you're looking at some of the responsibilities?
Yeah, a lot of times although the plan document is thorough, required, it's, needs to have all the details of how the plan operates. A lot of times people refer, and when I say people, the participants, those who even in HR are looking for references, a lot refer to the plan document. And it's really important to make sure that both the plan document and this SPD are in sync. And so sometimes I've seen where maybe a plan design change has taken place. Maybe there's been a switch with record keepers. And so the prototype doc has changed slightly. And so sometimes the variations are off. And while maybe the revised SPD is in sync perfectly with the plan document, sometimes there might be an old, maybe on an intranet site or, some posting to promote the benefits that kind of got lost in translation, if different HR people, or just something that was posted maybe 5 years ago. So it's really important to keep inventory of how information is communicated so that everything stays in sync, to avoid confusion and to also avoid any legalities or issues if misinformation is given.
No, definitely. And we do have a quick tip there at the bottom. Again, if anybody's with us that is a part of a governmental plan, there may be some additional information required, and we're happy to talk with you offline as it relates to that may be required, that needs to be sent to participants as well. So if we go into this next phase, maybe Laura, any ideas on what it looks like when you're talking about the third parties as well?
Yeah, so as it says here, plan fiduciaries are not expected, do not have, in all honesty, most do not have the resources, capability, or knowledge to run the plan in whole on their own. And so it is more than acceptable and often recommended to ask for help, get some expertise to support your plan. And one example that is very important is engaging participants with communications. As an example, when it comes to required disclosures and required information, a lot of times you're relying on your record keeper or a communications vendor or someone who has those resources and the knowledge to provide the most updated information based on DOL requirements. The examples, and a lot of times when you use your record keeper or a separate communication vendor, it's often they're asking for assistance behind the scenes as well. So there's just, listed here are a ton of different ways to engage your participants, but underneath the surface of some of those are things you have to do. So it's just, get help, but make sure you know what they're doing. And doesn't mean you have to know the the technicalities of it all. That's why you're hiring someone, but just sit down, take the time to, have them explain to you how something works, take you down the path of explaining, this is the process, this is who we use, so you can see how everything is being created and distributed. And do you want me to go with this one, Brianna?
Go ahead.
Okay. They have, as I said, they have the obligation to keep their participants informed, and not only active and term participants, but as Brianna mentioned before, those beneficiaries. You just need to make sure all participants are informed, and there's different ways. Sometimes reaching out to your term participants can be tricky. They might not be on your company's email distribution anymore. And so it's very important to know how each is being communicated and make sure there's mates to reach them. In hiring service providers, it can get lost in, once you get past the service of or how it's being communicated to your participants. Sometimes it gets lost in translation on how that's actually happening behind the scenes, how things are being delivered. Is it mail, electronically? How does it work if an email bounces back? If mail gets returned, who's tracking that? Is it the communication vendor? Is it your record keeper? If the record keeper is using a communication vendor, who's the responsible? Are they just sending a report to HR and assuming that's how it's being monitored and tracked? So just knowing how all those pieces move. And so it's really important that your service providers are making that clear to you. And if for some reason something's slipping behind, you need to monitor how that's happening. And there's minimum requirements for information. It has to be understood by, as it says here, the average participant. It can't be assumed that all of your participants have the same financial literacy skills. It can't be assumed that you're it's very clear to you, but you have to read it from a different point of view. You have to pretend, and when I say pretend, ask, take it out to source. Ask them, stay away from the acronyms as much as possible, because while this industry is full of them, most don't mean anything to anyone outside. And industries, you can have, if you're at a tech firm, they have their acronyms. Industry over here, DOL has their acronyms, and who knows, maybe they cross paths. So you just can't assume anything there.
No, definitely. And we have a question.
You can't over communicate either. So
yeah, it's not possible to over communicate. Yes. And we do have a question in the chat, Laura. So I will, so we use Nationwide, for an example, as a service provider. Mm-hmm. Would they be considered our service provider? So in this case, it depends. So there may be a solution while you're working with them as your record keeper. There are different ways that you may have engaged Nationwide to communicate with your population. So there's, and Laura, maybe I'll throw it to you. There mm-hmm. could be bundled or unbundled solutions, for example, that include communication and include education, et cetera. In general sense, though, Laura, would you agree that Nationwide as a record keeper would be your service provider in getting participant notices out?
In almost all cases, yes. However, it does need to be understood, and by just asking the question, that's awesome. That question should, after this, go to your, whether it's your relationship manager or your primary contact there, and ask, how are you given these notices that Brianna will briefly touch on later, and that we'll touch on, how are these being provided to our participants, our beneficiaries, our term participants, our active participants? How is this information being delivered? So in most cases, yes, it is designed. They're the primary point of contact. In most cases, they have that information on file, but it could be assumed that maybe they're just emailing anyone they have email addresses on file for. But if they don't have an email address, maybe it's slipping through. So it's really getting that understanding how they're doing it.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
part of the
We've got
monitoring. That's
yeah,
part, that is exactly the monitoring that was you mentioned earlier.
exactly. And we've got the tip there at the bottom where it says, confirm who is sending each required notice. I'm going to go through the required notices here in just one moment, but sometimes it can be the service provider or it needs to be the plan sponsor. One of the activities that we often do is having a controls meeting that discusses where this was sent, who it was sent by, and when it was sent. Because the frequency of that communication matters also, where it says here, fiduciaries should communicate consistently throughout. There could be a plan design change or information that needs to be shared. Over the previous few years, we've had a lot that have went. We've had CARES Act, Secures Act. We're about to go through more information. So there will be often things that need to be shared and delivered to participants. So being on top of that is definitely important. So Laura, thank you for that there. And I think we may have
Sure.
one additional. Oh, no. So it was just thank you. No problem. Yeah, thank you as well. And any questions just like that, we're happy to answer in real time. Again, if we don't have the answer, we'll take that back and share the information to everyone if we don't have the answer in real time. Okay, so let me jump into what we really would deem as your required notices. And then I'm also going to address what we would say more as needed as it relates to notices. So first we'll talk your required notices. First will be our plan document. We think we understand here that is our instrumental document that establishes the plan. Having that needs to be maintained, updated. Many of you on the call right now may be going through amendments, maybe updating your document as it related to what happened with CARES, for example. So that plan document, that is that written instrument that establishes the plan. It's pursuant to a ERISA. That is definitely a required document that you need to have on hand. Okay. Now our summary plan description, though, it explains the plan, its benefits, rights, and obligations. So it won't be near as long as our plan document. It is that summary. It's getting information around what benefits you receive, what rights you have as a participant, what obligations the plan sponsor has to you under the plan. So that would be your summary plan description. One here that doesn't happen as often, but it can come up, will be our material modifications. These are material changes to the plan, and this is the caveat, since the last SPD or summary plan description was shared. So if there has been no changes since the last summary plan description, you may not be required to share a material modifications. In the event that there has been major changes, the material changes to the plan, then that would be required also to be shared to participants. An annual report, I think some of you may be familiar with that termed as the Form 5500. The 5500 is provided after filing that from the 5500 each year. And that's the document that has all the information related to the plan, amount of participants, investments within the plan. I mean, there's a variety of things. If you haven't checked out your current 5500, we encourage you to take a look at that because it'll include a lot of information about what the plan has and how the plan functions. And then lastly would be probably what we would say would be one that often is monitored, probably the most, would be your participant level fee disclosures. That's the quarterly statement and annual fee disclosure that identifies all fees to be paid by participants. That includes whether it's investment level, so the individual investments that are within your investment menus, any administrative costs that may be passed through, and then also any operational expenses that relate to the administration of the investment plan, the retirement plan as well. So we would consider these required notices. Anything, Laura, there that you would add or update to some of those language as it relates to required notices?
Yeah, I guess that just in summarizing these notices right here, a key one kind of going back to changes and making sure it's properly distributed to all is if a material modification did occur to the plan and changes did happen, trickle down to the plan doc and SPD, it's just really important again to make sure those notifications, whether it's just like from the company outside of the plan on plan features, sometimes, HRs for recruiting materials will list features of the plan, whether it's a vesting schedule, maybe that change. I mean, it's just really making sure all the information is distributed equally. But yeah, and a lot of making sure those fee level disclosures
Yeah.
are tip top in shape. Those are
Definitely.
somehow a popular thing to look at these days by some.
And as I mentioned before, I would also talk about the as needed participant notices.
Mhm.
And so again, you've got your automatic enrollment notice. If you've got a plan that uses automatic enrollment, you'll want to make sure you describe those features, and those documents are shared with individuals as they're onboarding within the plan. If they have an automatic notice that they will be enrolled into the retirement plan, you'll want to make sure you're following those guidelines. If you have a qualified default investment alternative, that notice will describe the circumstances if an employee does not make a decision where their money will be defaulted to, and that is selected by your fiduciary retirement committee. That notice can be combined, as it mentions here, or distributed with the automatic enrollment notice. That is a common practice to share with someone, hey, you will be automatically enrolled in the plan. If you defer making a decision, you'll be put, for example, in a target date retirement fund to your vintage or to your age. You'll be added to that. That lets people know what to anticipate when they're joining the retirement plan. Blackout period notice, which may not happen often. So you may never see a blackout period notice, but that'll be a notice of any period of more than 3 days when a temporary suspension or restriction of the participant's account, where they will be able to take no action in their account. Maybe Laura, in your experience, this typically may happen if there's a vendor change or they need to port assets over. When have you seen blackout notices maybe in your experience?
Well, yeah, just as you said, when there's any sort of change where the funds are moving from one entity to another. A key note here as the plan sponsor, if a blackout were to, whether it be a record keeper change or whatnot, is to pay attention to the notice period. So in this case, there's a 30-day notice period. It's usually recommended to send that out before 30 days.
Yes.
Not only to provide ample notification when available and when possible, but also to not fall into there was a hiccup in getting information mailed. And so now you're past the 30 days. Making sure there might be something that was overlooked in a project timeline where, oh shoot, now we needed to do this, give yourself that buffer so that you're not in a corner trying to figure out and scramble on making sure it's out in a timely fashion and making sure it's out accurately. And it can be a stressful time for some. Maybe they just don't even care. They never use or transfer funds in their account, but just knowing there's a blackout causes some questions. And so it's the more communication, the earlier on, the better on those.
No,
but there are some notice periods to pay attention to.
No, definitely. And then the last couple there, specific to 403B plans, there is universal availability that notifies participants that they have eligibility for a period of time when they can make their elections or any other conditions on elections. And then a safe harbor plan. If you have a safe harbor plan, notifying your participants that the plan elects safe harbor status, you'll want to make sure that that is disclosed and shared with participants as well. Okay. So as we went through the participant, you also have to deliver this information. Laura, I'll turn it over to you for some thoughts there.
Yeah. So there's numerous ways to reach out to participants when distributing required notices. Regulations are established, set forth by the DOL to ensure, the goal in doing that is to ensure participants receive the notices, that it's not assumed that they're going to receive it. So as far as digital communications, over the past couple decades, it has greatly expanded. While mail was always and still is the default, it's not necessarily the most efficient way to connect with your participants these days. And so in many cases, it's best to use electronic communications as long as they're used properly. And so the DOL has established set guidelines that plan sponsors need to be aware of. They were initially established in 2002, updated the safe harbor notifications in 2020, and there was an 18-month transition period that has recently, this last January, expired. Those are things you need to, in using e-delivery, any sort of method, work with your service providers to make sure you understand and that they're following these guidelines set forth by the DOL. But again, in all cases, the default remains first class mail, like plain and simple. If you don't have an, if you try and something bounces back, email. If it just, again, those beneficiaries, termed participants, first class mail is considered the default. This slide here highlights what must be taken into consideration when using electronic communications. And I'm not gonna, if there's any questions, please let me know, but that kind of highlights the electronic notice must meet consumer consent requirements. Administrators meet the exemptions from consumer consent requirements. And with all communications, they each need to be designed in a way that resonates with the employee base. Again, firms, organizations vary, widely. If you're a financial services organization, you'll cater it one way if everyone's in this industry and understands the materials. Maybe you have people out in the field, teachers that just, vast amounts of knowledge, and yet this isn't up their alley. So you just have to make sure it's in a way that they'll want to read it. Sometimes too much fine print. When I get something that's just like all small, it's just not appealing. And so it just kind of sits off to the side. So, and that's going to happen, but whatever you can do to make it appealing and easy. And while you're trying to communicate to your employees in different, different means, different ways, a great strategy would be required to meet these guidelines. It's never permissible to post notices to an internet site. And again, that's going back to some of those safe harbor guidelines. While it can definitely be posted, and it's encouraged if you can put information in multiple places to reach multiple, people where they're at, that's great. It just can't be relied upon as the only source of information. And so I don't know, Brian, do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, because we did get a couple questions also. So no,
okay.
Yeah, so the first question was around safe harbor status. And generally that's related to non-discrimination testing, testing your employees within the plan. And it really is around providing all eligible plan participants with a contribution. So that lets them know that if they enter the plan, the employer will be providing them a contribution. That contribution allows the support with testing. We can provide some additional backup information there if you're more interested on the safe harbor process, but that's the general gist around it. Laura, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, safe harbor, there's definitely the testing and all that. There's also safe harbor guidelines established on the idea of e-communications. As the digital age, had approached in 2002, it just, again, became more of a efficiency, a demand, a cost savings. I mean, there's just a whole slew of reasons, but it was an area that the DOL had to pay attention to. And so they established guidelines that, if followed to the T, you are considered under that, what they call a safe harbor. Similar to what Brian was mentioning, there's safe harbor guidelines out there for testing and compliance on that side. With e-communications, there were other safe harbors established. COVID came in 2020, and the discussions and stuff sparked in 2019 prior to that, but there were some changes as well to reaching the individuals as far as certain forms of, if you could email your individuals if they consent, in the workplace, if your employees were at a computer, had a work email address, it could be considered acceptable, a form in lieu of the first class mailing as a default. Again, it has opened up the door to reaching more individuals. While clear, they're detailed and long. And so there are a lot of resources out there, and should be all record keepers are well versed in those guidelines. Your consultants, again, we're happy to, if you want to follow up, provide information on those. I did mention there was an 18-month grace period. They called it a transition period. So those safe harbor changes in 2020 are now in effect. There were a few nuances that expired. So you just really want to, and some of those are based off IRS, SEC. You just want to make sure that, again, and then going back to when there's changes, going down that inventory checklist within monitoring your service providers on that. But if there's questions on the details, please reach out to us.
Yeah, definitely. And the second question that we got was around, can we just place these items in an employee box? And I would say let's defer and get an answer back on that one. There are some rules maybe around that, but we want to make sure that we use the correct information there. So give us a moment. We will give that back to everybody, that the rule around, can we just place this in an employee's box if they have like a mail slot at the office? So give us an opportunity to review that as well. Okay. And then the last question that we've got so far was, will the slides be available? Yes, we will share the presentation and that information back with you all. You should get a link from our internal department a few days after the presentation is complete. Good. Okay, so required versus optional engagement. Laura, some thoughts here.
Yeah, we have been going over a lot of how to handle required notices. Again, these are to ensure your participants, even employees who are considering enrolling and becoming a participant, are well versed and well aware of the details of the plan. And Breon had outlined several of those earlier. But there's several additional forms, ways, information to get out to your participants. Can prove extremely beneficial in engaging and encouraging plan participation. After you work really hard to establish a retirement plan that complies with all the regulations, the next goal, and while not required, should be an emphasis, is to promote engagement, promote participation in the plan. Listed on the slide here are a few areas where plan sponsors rely on their service providers for support. There's many reasons to engage. You want your workforce to be financially literate. It just helps reduce the stress. They're not coming to work having to worry about, how their car, just a whole slew of reasons, but it just creates a level of comfort and assurance. So anything you can do, while not an employer's responsibility, it just, again, is a good retention tool as well, if there's resources available. Employees want to retire on time. They want to work hard knowing that that's the end, goal for many, maybe not all, but just getting the information out. Again, a few are listed here. You want to hit your workplace, your employees where they're at. Targeted messaging. Again, many are sophisticated on the service providers on working with you to get that out. You might find group meetings, we're in a day of virtual, sometimes virtual works, but then a lot of times people want to have that in-person interaction. It's easier sometimes to ask questions or understand if you just are eye to eye with someone. So having them come out to your, place of employment or where your participants are at. Education, just there's a whole slew of, tools and resources out there. So make sure you're working with your service providers in understanding what you're paying for. Sometimes you are paying for the service and you don't, maybe it's not being thrown out there to your employees so they know, and your participants know that it's available. What resources do they offer? Just be well versed in that. And then, at the end of the day, if there's a piece missing, there's probably a service provider out there that'll offer it. So again, it's that holistic, yes, you have to give them required stuff, but you want to engage them.
Definitely. So what does all this look like? We've been talking about service providers. You got to monitor, but at the same time, you need to select those service providers potentially as well. We even had the question around, well, what exactly would be our service providers? What does that process look like? So when you're looking at hiring a service provider, regardless of whether they are a record keeper or an auditor or an investment advisor or like consultant or whatever it is that will help you run an efficient and effective retirement plan, you must follow a prudent process. One of the things that we talk about often with all of our plan fiduciaries is that not only do you have a process, that process is ongoing. So if you notice here, we have a circle to assume that there's really no end point in this. It is always something that is happening. So as I start on the top left, or I'm sorry, top right, one of the first things you'll be doing is gathering relevant information. What resources do you need help with? Determine the needs of your participants. What level of engagement and in services are required? You may notice that participants are not engaging with the retirement plan as needed, or maybe not updating things as required when there's necessary changes going on. You'll want to be able to gather all of that information. And after you've gathered that information, of course, the next step we will look at will be analyzing that information. Now, Laura, you do a lot of analyzing information on our team. What does that analyze information part look like in your world as you're getting a lot of data, a lot of information back?
Well, yeah, and I mean, when you're gathering all this information and you have everything sitting in front of you, then you need to kind of organize it in a way that makes sense, so that when you break it down, the analyzing part is really multiple facets, and to make it simplified, you have a qualitative review where you're just looking at what those services being offered are, whether it's a record keeper, an auditor, investment consultant, so forth. You want to know, for the services being offered, what is the quality of that service? And so, it has to be also relevant to your plan. So maybe they offer a, fun bells and whistles feature over here, but if it's not relevant to your plan, if they have fancy managed accounts, but your plan isn't offering that, then just take that out of the equation and focus on what is relevant. In gathering information and stepping back, it's helpful to hire someone. Use your service providers to help sort out that information. Ask questions you may not have been aware that needed to be asked, and help sort that out, so that when you get to the analyze stage, you're analyzing relevant information. In addition to taking that qualitative review, you need to, and I separate it when looking quantitatively at the fees for the services offered, because you want to kind of make sure, to simplify, let's say you're going out and buying a shirt and you want to make sure that that's quality, it fits you, it's good, and then you look at the price. You can't just assume the cheapest is the best. In many cases it's not, and sometimes it's a great deal and it is, but you just have to have a different lens when looking at it, qualitative versus quantitative. So in doing that, you just, everyone's a little different. It just depends on the information gathered, the reason you're even doing the search and whatnot.
And then as we look at the as you kind of close out the circle, but again, it's a continuing process. Of course, you'll have a meeting and you'll make a decision. You'll make an objective determination as to which service providers can best support and meet your participant needs, especially here as we're talking about engagement. If we're looking at a record keeper, let's make sure that they have a solution that can mail participants on time, send notifications when required, being able to communicate changes, etc. You'll want to be able to work with your group, your committee, on meeting and making that decision. And then I know Laura will echo this. Anyone within our firm, of course, we will say this. None of this ever happened if you did not document the process. You have to document the process, whether it's in a fiduciary file, meeting minutes, any materials that were used as a part of this determination. You'll want to be able to provide that, because not only as you are a fiduciary, you're transparent around your decision making, you'll want to be able to look back at that file to see the history of the ways that, whether one, you've improved your retirement plan, made changes, to be able to share the story of how effective and efficient that you are. Because again, these are valuable benefits that are added to employees. So being able to document that process is probably going to be the most important part of that wheel. Being able to share tell the story of what happened. And the only way you'll be able to do that is if you're documenting the process along the way. And again, you may go through this multiple times. You may gather information, analyze, meet, make decisions. You'll be documenting. You may be doing that often.
Yeah, it's similar to just when you're communicating to your employees and documenting the process. It has to be able to be picked up by a new employee on your end in HR, or maybe if your firm does another search 5 years down the road, just purely due diligence. Someone needs to pick up this material and understand how you got from point A to point Z. It doesn't make sense to have a bunch of jargon, numbers, information that's not organized in a way that can be translated 5 years down the road.
Definitely, definitely. And then the next piece would be, as we're looking at the monitoring and evaluating. Laura has mentioned several times that you have a duty to monitor and also evaluate those service providers as well. So let's say we hire someone, they're going to help us, they're going to assist us with communication, education, or advice. Whatever, again, as you make your needs assessment, what you feel may be required for your employee population or the participants in the retirement plan. At that same time, we need to be able to monitor and evaluate what's happening during that process. So reviewing reports. Most plan providers, they have a system that you can log into. Some have a plan sponsor website or a focus area where you can log in and gather information on when participants' mailings will be sent, what medium will be used, email or mail, identify what participants have been sent information. Laura mentioned it before. If you have any bounce back or missing participants, lost participants, how you can gather that information, because again, while you're monitoring and evaluating, you're ultimately required as the plan sponsor for that information. Being able to review those reports from the service providers showing participation, contributions, and retirement readiness, all of that goes back to engagement. We don't often think about, well, how engaged is our population? Does that really relate to retirement readiness? Well, it does. Those tie in directly. A more engaged population typically will have more tools to make them better ready for retirement. So making sure that they're utilizing the tools and services that you all offer as well. Any other details that you would like to share, Laura, as we're talking about monitoring and evaluating?
Yeah, I think just on the first point you made there on, you have an obligation to make sure you have the correct way of getting hold of your participants. And sometimes emails get lost in the transfer on the indicative data. If you have a termed employee, sometimes they will go to that service provider, the record keeper, to update their email address with them. Is it coming back to you? I mean, how is that information? If you were to change record keepers, who's holding that information, on being able to reach those participants? So just really understanding the flow of data, I think, that's a key part there.
Yeah, definitely. And then we've got a few bullets there. One of the things that we do on an annual basis is around benchmarking fees for associated services. Being able to really review in detail what you're paying for, being able to understand what you're paying for, and then also see what that looks like amongst the universe of other providers as well. And then last but not least, as I mentioned before, document. You have to document all reviews, keep copies of that documentation, because again, that is the process that will make sure, we're looking at that wheel again, it happened because you documented it, you're able to share that story, to Laura's point, in a way that anyone could pick it up and understand what happened from A to Z. All right. So now you're required to inform your participants and beneficiaries about the plan through required disclosures. Do not feel like you have to do it on your own. You can hire a service provider to help with different areas where participants will need assistance. Oftentimes, it may not be, you may not have the bandwidth in your departments or your staff to handle what needs to be required as it relates to the plan. And then while you are not required to hire a service provider to engage with participants, once you do, to Laura's point we mentioned before, you must monitor them on an ongoing basis as well. That can be supported by a service provider as well. But again, as the plan fiduciary, it is your requirement to monitor those service providers on an ongoing basis. So that somewhat ends our prepared material. We did want to leave about 10 minutes or so for questions. So if there are any additional questions, this is your time to open in the chat. And if not, we will get back our answer around adding details to employee boxes on site. So we'll take a pause here and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, and one point, we'll just add, while we're waiting to see if anyone has anything additional to inquire about, while this can seem like a big chore, a big task to have to even approach your service providers to start digging into this, it is a unique opportunity. If you can set aside just a little bit of time, because then you can get it reconfirmed and get to know your plan in detail to understand how it's working. So it does open up a good opportunity to revisit and thoroughly understand what you're giving your participants.
Definitely. Okay, and seeing no questions, we will give you all, 10 minutes or so back in your day. So, Laura, any closing thoughts that you've got?
No, again, thank you for taking the time to listen to us and hear us out. And again, as Breon said, please reach out if you have any questions or just general inquiries.
No, and thanks so much. And again, there will be a recording. The information will be shared back with you in the next couple of days. So we appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.